Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. We made it to episode 100. Wow. Engagers, thanks for being a part of this journey. Here's to the next 100 episodes. Now, let's go for this interview where we have one of the most requested experts by past guests and fellow engagers. So hello engagers, today we have a very, very special guest. It's no other than Nir Eyal. So Nir, before we get started and we get into your intro, are you prepared to engage?
I am very prepared to engage. Sign me up.
Let's do this. Let's go. Because Nir, as you probably know, he writes, he consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. The MIT Technology Review dubbed Nir the prophet of habit-forming technology. So that's very, very amazing. And it's many of the references that we use in many of our chats here and many of the experts are using Nir as an example for sure. Because he founded two tech companies since 2003. He has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford as well. He is the author of Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and his most recent work, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And in addition, of course, to writing in his own blog, nirandfar.com, Nir's been writing and he's been featured at Harvard Business Review, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. Besides all of these things that he already does, he's also an active investor in habit-forming technologies, and some of these investments include Eventbrite, Refresh.io, that was acquired by LinkedIn, WorkLife, which was acquired by Cisco, Product Hunt, Marco Polo, Presence Learning, 7 Cups, Pana, Kahoot, ByteFoods, FocusMate, and Anchor.fm, which was recently acquired by Spotify. As far as his background, he also attended the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Emory University. So, Nir, is there anything we're missing from that amazing background?
My life just flashed before my eyes here. That was amazing. I want to meet this guy. I'm not sure it's me you're talking about, but it sounds about right.
So, Nir, after all these amazing things that we know that you're doing, what we would like to know, what does a regular day, week, what does being Nir today look like?
Well, that's actually an easy question to answer because part of what I wrote about in my new book, Indistractable, is about making time for traction, living out your values by making sure that you turn your values into time. So my days are pretty regular from week to week. There is some change from time to time. Every week I reevaluate my calendar, but I use this technique called time boxing, which is all about using what's called setting an implementation intention, which is just a fancy way of saying planning what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. So I'll tell you exactly what my days look like.
Fantastic.
So my wake up time is 7 a.m., 7:15 to 8 I eat breakfast, 8 to 9 I work out, 9 to 11:30 I write. 11:30 to 12:30 I have lunch with my family, and then the afternoon is 2 days a week I'm with my daughter in the afternoon. We homeschool, so I have a lot of time with her. And then 3 days a week I do interviews, meetings, sometimes catch up with friends, go out on Wednesdays and Thursdays are usually the evenings that I reserve to do something around town. And that's typically my day. Is that answer? It's not terribly exciting. I wish there were some more, some more excitement to that, but it's pretty routine.
I actually think that's very exciting. And the fact that you have it very structured, I'm sure it also allows you to have those evenings that you have that you say you're going to go out on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The good thing is that you have that time and you can really plan for doing awesome things if you want to, and whatever it is that you're going to stick into your schedule, you can stick to it.
Right. So I wasn't always like this. I want to make sure you understand. Sometimes when I tell people about this method of becoming indistractable that I've been researching over the past 5 years, they say, "Whoa, wow, you must have a lot of self-discipline that you can do that." I say, "No, you don't understand. It's because I don't have self-discipline. This is why I need this technique." So I talked to Adam Grant. I'm not sure if you know, he's an amazing author. He's incredibly prolific. I think he's written 5 or 6 books now. He did one with Sheryl Sandberg, and he wrote a book about give and take, and he's written many excellent books, and he's a professor at Wharton as well. And he read my book and he liked it, but he's like, I don't really have this problem. I'm never distracted. In fact, I'm looking for a distraction. And I was like, what planet are you from? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm constantly tempted by distraction. How could you not these days with so many interesting things to do with your time? There's infinite number of videos to watch and articles to read and things happening in the news and things you could learn about. And it's all right here in our pockets, let alone games you could play. Oh, my God, all the amazing games you could play. So I'm very distractible until I decided to get the bottom of why I was so distractible and found this methodology to become indistractable, which is the name of my new book.
Fantastic, because we're probably going to be getting into a lot of that technique as much as we can today. We will be talking about that, of course. You can find the links to both books of Nir in the show notes. So if you go to professorgain.com, you write Nir Eyal, you'll definitely find this episode and the show notes where we'll have all of the links to the blog, to the books, to all of the information that we'll have from Nir. So Nir, the first thing, and we start strong in this podcast with these kinds of questions, is we would like to have a story about a time when you were using, behavioral psychology for a project, or, one of your strategies, your techniques, maybe from Hooked, maybe from Indistractable. You set out to do something, and you had these objectives, and it, even if just the first time, but it didn't really come out as you were expecting. So you had your fail moment or your first attempt in learning. We want to be there with you. We want to go through this whole story and know what you learned and how you went through it. So, take it away.
So I've had many of these moments, more of them in the beginning of my career. I mean, the reason I even wrote Hooked in the first place was because I had helped start two companies, and the second one was in the intersection of gaming and advertising. And we started this company in 2007. So remember, in 2007, there was no such thing as apps as we conceive of them today. When you said the word apps in 2007, today, if you were to say that word, that would mean smartphone apps, right? On your iPhone or on Android, that's what apps mean. Everybody assumes it's on your smartphone. That was not the case in 2007 because the Apple App Store hadn't been unveiled yet in 2007. It came out in 2008. And so apps back then meant Facebook apps. That was the platform that people were building apps for at the time
Yes,
when Facebook
indeed.
was really, taking off. And we had all these stupid, games like throwing sheep at each other and, all the silly stuff that people were doing. But we had this kind of front row seat to try and figure out why some companies came and some companies went with, and you couldn't really tell why some games worked and some games didn't. They just kind of, one thing was clear: you could get big very, very quick, right? Because the viral mechanics that were available at the time on Facebook were just unbelievable. I mean, you could acquire 1 million users in a matter of hours. It was really incredible, but there was really no rhyme or reason to it. And so the business that I was in at the time, I was still in business school, in the second year in business school. The business that we were in was this aggregator of all of these games and try and help them monetize through in-game placements. So at the time we were around, we raised money on this idea of virtual goods. And today it's a real business, right? Billions of dollars are made in virtual goods, but nobody knew what the hell we were talking about when we were talking about virtual goods. Investors were just totally confused. Wait a minute, you buy something in a game, but there's no physical component to it. It's just bits in the game. Yeah. You got it. No, right? Absolutely not. It was a very, very difficult concept to get, to help investors and potential employees understand. And so, we tried all kinds of things. We tried, this is when I really started getting to the work of BJ Fogg and Robert Cialdini and many other people in this space around persuasive design. And it took us a long time. I mean, we tried these various techniques and you expect them to just work automatically. Even my hook model to some degree, people say, okay, great. Well, now that we've got engagement down, that's it. And they
What's
say that as
next?
if, yeah, exactly. What's next? And they say that as if, well, now they know the hook model. Then of course that's it. They don't have to test. They don't have to talk to customers. They don't have to do any kind of iteration on the product. And that's absolutely not the case, right? It's a framework to help you come up with better hypotheses. It doesn't mean that you will succeed the first time out of the gate. The chances of that are nil pretty much, right? You still have to iterate, you still have to build, measure, learn. So but the idea behind all these principles of persuasive design are to help you come up with better hypotheses. And so that's what I learned in those years running that last company was that even if you have these ideas and you understand these principles, these tendencies, these are tendencies. They're not rules, right? And in fact, many times when people become aware of these rules, or of these tendencies, I should say, they take steps to make sure they don't get influenced by them. And we see more of that today, actually, as more people use these techniques, like scarcity, for example. When you go on Amazon and it says only 5 left in stock, that's rubbish. That's not true. And so, so it's interesting. So yeah, that was I guess my experience of trying my hand at these behavioral techniques and them not working out was when I didn't understand how to appropriately apply them.
I think that's particularly interesting for this audience because we can see there that exactly what we've talked about in all of these episodes is strategies, ways to approach, ideas, projects, design, consulting. But none of them is like a rule. It's not we're dealing with people in the end. And so
right.
we people are strange. We're not a function in math.
Right, and remember, even when we prove, so to speak, I mean, you never prove anything in science. You validate hypotheses. Nothing is proven because you can always have another study that says actually that didn't happen at all, and that's what we're actually experiencing right now in this replication crisis. That things that we thought were for sure priming, ego depletion, these things are falling like dominoes because they can't replicate. So, even when we have these principles that we think are rock solid, we still need to test because, again, these are tendencies. This means that all that means is that there is a statistically significant chance that the reason someone did something was not because of chance. It was because of something else. And our hypothesis is it was because of one of these persuasive techniques. But again, it's on the margin, right? And it's kind of informs, I think, the debate around distraction and addiction these days. This I'm probably preaching to the choir with your listeners because, I think we have this perception recently, and it's really changed. I mean, when I started doing this work, when I wrote Hooked, it was published 5 years ago. I had to convince people that behavioral design was effective, right? Well, now it's
it was
gone
a
the other
thing
extreme.
even.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, "Nah, Zuckerberg just got lucky," right? Like, really, that's what people told me. I was like, "No, I don't think so." He understands what makes people click and what makes people tick better than they understand themselves. People don't realize. Everybody knows that he was a computer science major in college before he dropped out at Harvard, but he also had another major, and that other major was psychology. When you look at the founders of many of these, Kevin Systrom, another good example, at Stanford, he was a symbolic systems major. Many of these folks who run these companies have a background in, of course, technology and computer science, but also in psychology. But I had to convince folks that no, this behavioral design stuff really does work, again, on the margins. But now the conversation has shifted so dramatically. I think the pendulum has swung so far the other way, where now people think that, when they describe behavioral design, they make it sound like this, ability to hijack people's minds. I saw an article that said that, and that it causes addiction, and that, that these games can make people do whatever they want them to do. And if you've actually spent a day building a product, these techniques are good. They're not that good. Right? Like, you can't make people consistently do something they don't want to do unless they have some kind of pathology like an addiction. And
I think that happened to a certain extent as well with TV. Like all these years
Yes.
ago. Like, no,
Yeah.
TV is mind controlling us and we're becoming stupid and just doing what TV tells us. And I don't think that's the way it worked ever. So,
And guess what? Not only was it about TV, they said the same thing about
oh,
radio.
yeah.
They said the same thing about pinball games. They said the same thing about the written word, for God's sake. Socrates said the written word was going to enfeeble men's minds. Yeah, and it's true to some degree, right? That like I'm sure the ancient Greeks could keep a lot more in their head because they didn't have the written word. But every new technology has trade-offs. But that doesn't make it mind control. It doesn't mean that, just because there are some negative potential trade-offs that it's somehow hijacking our brain. I think that's rubbish.
Exactly, and in that same sense, we've been talking about what we spoke about what things don't work, why don't they work, and I wanted to talk about the opposite story, about a time, of course, maybe not as you were mentioning, we have to test things, see what works, what doesn't, iterate, test things. So not necessarily in the first attempt, but something that actually you set out to do. You set out to use these behavioral design techniques on some project or some startup or company or whatever. And it actually worked. And of course, your hypotheses, again, about why these things worked, how they worked, what was your story, what were your thoughts behind these things. Of course, as much as you can reveal, because we also know that companies like to sign these NDAs and so on. So
Yeah. So to answer that question, I'm actually going to kind of defer some credit to the companies that actually implemented the ideas in Hooked. So Hooked is now about 5 years old, and we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary of the book. And it's been amazing. We actually have I just edited a new edition. So there'll be a 5-year edition with some additional case studies in it. Not that much revising to the actual core model, but a bit of updating, a new case study to kind of freshen it up a bit. But one of the things I mentioned in the introduction to the new edition of the book are these companies who have used the Hook model in ways I never imagined. So, when I wrote Hooked, I wanted to democratize these techniques. I didn't want it to just be, Facebook and YouTube and the gaming companies that use these techniques. They've known these techniques for a long time. I wanted everyone to use these techniques. So I cite companies like Paga, which is this company that's bringing millions of previously unbanked people in Africa online for the first time by creating new healthy habits around saving money. Kahoot, the world's largest educational software. They went public not that long ago. Again, this is a company that has used the Hooked model to build healthy habits, to make classroom education more engaging. Like, what a great habit. One of the case studies in the book is Fitbod, an app that helps build a gym habit for folks, helps them exercise once they get to the gym. I actually use it. And I wrote an article a few years ago on my blog that said, your fitness app is making you fat, because I was so frustrated by how terrible all the fitness apps were out there. And then I saw this app Fitbod, and I started playing with it and started using it, and it changed my own habits. I've always hated exercise, and for the first time I was exercising consistently with this app. I loved it, and I actually reached out to them and I said, "This is brilliant. You guys did a great job." And they said, "Oh, Nir Eyal, we read your book, Hooked. We designed it with the Hook model in mind." And so that's been really, really amazing to see.
fantastic. So those are some great examples. I'm sure by all those names we'll be able to find many of the things they did. Would you like to focus for a minute or two on one of those cases, and what do you think was like their focus, how this whole thing happened so that they were actually successful? Again, Fitbod or any of the examples that you mentioned.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about Fitbod. They did something very interesting in that, most companies out there, I think, make the mistake of not defining their habit appropriately. Particularly with these companies that are in are altruistic by nature. They're trying to help people exercise or eat healthfully or save money. All great things that we need to change folks' habit around in order to help them build these healthy routines, these healthy habits. However, they're too broad about defining the habit. So the reason I think most exercise apps out there are awful is that they define, when many times they'll attend my seminars, or they'll ask me different questions, and when I ask them, what's the habit you want to change for your user, they'll say something super vague like, "Oh, we want to help them create a habit of a healthy lifestyle." Well, that's not a behavior, that's not a habit, that's an aspiration. And so I think Fitbod did a really good job right out of the gate of saying, we don't want everyone. We want to create a habit around one specific behavior. And that one specific behavior is they wanted to target the kind of person who goes to the gym and has no idea what to do. Okay, so they don't want the couch potato. They don't want the person who doesn't go to the gym. That is not their market. They define their market as people who go to the gym and feel uncomfortable. And that's the internal trigger. The hook model, just real quick, these 4 steps: trigger, action, reward, and investment through successive cycles. This is how we form habits. So the first step is figuring out what's the internal trigger, what's the user's itch, their uncomfortable emotional state that they seek to escape. And that demographic of someone who goes to the gym and feels really uncomfortable because there's all these meatheads and muscle heads all over the place, and they seem to know what they're doing, and I have no idea what I'm doing. That's the problem they wanted to solve for. Exactly who I was. You open the app with one button. That's the action phase, the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward. That uncomfortable emotion melts away. That feeling of uncertainty disappears. Why? Because the next step of the hook, the variable reward, is looking through the exercises for what to do today. Now, what they do, what's really brilliant, they used all 4 steps of the hook model, the most important for them being the investment phase, and no other fitness app that I've seen so far does this as well as they do. They take the information from your last workout and custom design your next workout based on that information. That's the investment phase of the hook, the 4th step. So because you worked out yesterday and you did a leg workout, today we're going to give you an upper body workout because we know how tired your legs will be. And it tells you what to do, which exercise to do, how much weight to do, how much reps to lift. And there's not only variability in terms of, I wonder what the app is going to ask me to do today. There's variability in the intrinsic behavior of the workout itself, because they are dynamically adjusting your reps and sets based on what you did last time. So it pushes you just a little bit. Can you do one more rep on this? Because last time you did one less. Can you get one more in? That's the variability where they have essentially made this almost game-like mechanic of variability, variable rewards. But it's so healthy because it's intrinsic. It's not, we'll give you a badge. We're going to place you on the leaderboard. They're making the behavior itself, lifting the weights, the thing that you're trying to find, that is variable, that they're coupling with this variable reward. So the result is, after years now of using this app, I love exercising now. I actually really look forward to going to the gym, which is terrific. Now I would go even without the app. But of course, because it's collected all this information on me, it's something I want to keep using because the gains aren't real unless you recorded them. so I really like that. I think that's a particularly good implementation of the hook model.
Fantastic.
And of course, the best part is that it's helping people build a healthy habit. It's not some frivolous behavior.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the ethic components of this whole thing is always like really important. If you're designing this only for people to drink more at casinos or that kind of thing, it's a difficult spot to be at.
Yeah, and there's rules that I have, and I appreciate the code of ethics you put on your site as well, and I think that's something that's in my playbook as well. I have this code that I won't work with any company that depends upon addicts, and there are definitely some companies that have asked me to work with them that I've refused. Some free-to-play games. I think the entire alcohol industry, machine gambling, Las Vegas style casinos. There are many industries that as opposed to companies that build habits, and of course, unfortunately, if you have a product that's used by enough people, somebody is going to get addicted. That's an unfortunate byproduct. That's one type of company that I will work with. The kind that's unethical is the kind that only cares about the people who are addicted. I think if you look at the alcohol industry, it's 20% of the industry of customers consume something like 90% of the product. Yep. So they without those people who are frankly alcoholics, the industry wouldn't survive. The same happens with machine gambling. It's that 1% of users, the whales, that keep the entire industry in business. And so those type of enterprises where they rely upon and even prey upon the addicts, that I think is unethical.
Absolutely. And the important thing to keep in mind, and I completely concur in your approach, Nir, but in general, I think that the main thing is to know where your boundaries are, because depending on what type of work you do as well, that could be different. I have a friend who used to be a consultant at McKinsey, and she said, look, the only thing I told McKinsey I wouldn't work with was, as you mentioned, tobacco industry. She was willing to work with military, which other people are not willing to work with military for whatever reason. She said, my boundaries are tobacco industry. I had, some family members dying from cancer, lung cancer, and it was directly related to smoking. So that's my boundary. And your boundaries, as long as they're very clear, I think they give you peace, and they will actually get you better business in general.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you can look yourself in the mirror and know that your time on Earth was well spent.
Exactly. And Nir, we've been talking about the hooked model. You mentioned briefly how that looks like. I don't know if in general, when you approach I don't know if you're doing consulting or project work in general, but if you are, or if you were, is there any sort of series of steps that you follow? Is it exactly the hooked model? Or does it depend on the situation? How do you we would like to know, how do you approach in general, of course, a project? Is there a steps model? How do you do it?
Yeah, so the nice part about the hook model and about the book is that 80% of what's in my brain is in the book. So it's a model that I use in my consulting practice. It's a model I use when I angel invest in companies. That's kind of my secret sauce, is being able to spot these companies that have the potential to be habit forming and then invest in them. That's what I think, that's why folks want me to invest in their companies versus, there's a lot of capital out there. You can raise money from a lot of different people. I think that's kind of my in. But to be honest, anybody could use this. That's why I wrote this book. I wanted these techniques to get out there so that everyone could use these techniques to help their customers build healthier habits. So it really starts with 5 basic questions. And here they are. The first question is, what's the user's itch? What's the internal trigger that prompts them to action? The second question is, what's the external trigger that gives them some piece of information for what to do next? The third question is, what's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward? The fourth, this is the variable reward phase. What's the variable reward that keeps them wanting more, that scratches the itch and yet leaves them wanting more? And then finally, the fifth question is, what's the bit of work the user does to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? That's it. So the idea is that it's very helpful in 2 phases. It's helpful in the very early days of a company, when the founders are kind of sitting around, maybe slightly after the napkin sketch phase, when they're trying to figure out what do they want to build, but certainly before any code has been written or you've hired a designer or something. So you can sit down and ask yourself these 5 basic questions to see if your business is one that has the potential to be habit forming. And then the other phase where it's helpful is where something breaks. Right. So I'm kind of the plumber that they call in to fix the leaks. There are many businesses these days that have figured out growth and they suck at engagement. Right. You can buy growth. You can go out there and buy a bunch of ads and you will grow your user base. You can, you just plow in venture capital money and you can buy those advertisements that will get people to install your app. What you can't buy is engagement. And so you get a lot of businesses that are leaky buckets, right? Users come in and users leak out. And so that's the other place that the hooked model is helpful, is if you have a business that for some reason is not keeping customers engaged, is not bringing people back on their own, you can ask yourself these 5 questions to see, okay, what's deficient in our business model, or what is not there in the user experience that might make this particular hook deficient in some way.
Absolutely. And just one more question regarding your model, because at the start, one of the things that you mentioned, and I have to completely agree, is it's not just about knowing these rules and applying them the first time. It might include iteration. Are there any rules of thumb that you use for iteration, for testing, evaluating if your solutions are working as they are?
Yeah, so the best methodology that I've seen comes out of the sprint methodology, which also takes cues from the lean startup methodology. So Eric Ries wrote Lean Startup. My friend Jake Knapp wrote this book called Sprint, and I think that's a great methodology. So Sprint is basically lean on steroids. It's accelerating the whole process, but the basics are pretty simple. It's build, measure, learn, right? So the hardest part of build, measure, learn is the building. That's where all the blood, sweat, and tears and money all go. So the idea is before you spend all that time and money building something that's not going to work, run it through the hook model. Then after you've generated some hypotheses that you want to test, well, now you have to test, right? You have to do a very low fidelity prototype, go out there and build something that can give you some kind of user feedback around, learn from it, and then repeat the cycle. So build, measure, learn, as proposed by Eric Ries, Steve Blank has done a lot of work in this category as well, is a very effective methodology for that.
Fantastic. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. Nir, now that we've been going on for a while with the interview, I'd like to know if there's, of course, besides using the hooked model, is there any, sort of strong advice or any something that maybe you would say is a best practice when using behavioral science that you would say, look, always think about this and your project will most probably benefit from that?
Just because I think it's top of mind these days around ethics. I think that's a conversation that I think people are having more these days, which is terrific. I never titled the book How to Build Addictive Products. It's called How to Build Habit-Forming Products, because addictions, implicit in the definition of an addiction is harm. So we would never want to addict people. It's very different, right? An addiction is a pathology, and preying upon people with a pathology is unethical. But I think there's a bigger question around, how do we quickly decide when it is ethically appropriate to use behavioral design tactics? And, this question is not something I directly address in Hooked. I do have what's called the manipulation matrix in the book Hooked, and it's always been there, since it was first published, which is a way for you as an individual, as an individual designer or entrepreneur, or whatever your role might be, to ask yourself what you want to work on. But that's a question just for you. And I think it's a very useful tool, but the reality is that sometimes we make decisions in groups. And so you can have a project that you're excited about, a tool that you want to be working on, but there's this one tactic that somebody wants to use, this bit of behavioral design that you're not sure if it's ethical or not. And so I went on this quest a couple of years ago to figure out, what's a rule that we can use in the room, right, in a meeting room, when we're not sure if if a tactic is ethical. I think a code of ethics is terrific. I think that's wonderful. The problem is it's really hard to remember, a 5-point rule list. It's good in theory, and we should all sign up for it. It's terrific. But when it comes to, okay, you're in the room, how do you raise your hand and say something that gets everyone's attention and helps them focus on whether a particular tactic is ethical? So first thing I did was see what's currently available. And so, I explored Google's rule of don't be evil. They don't actually that's not their official rule anymore, by the way, but it used to be. And it's not really good enough if you think about it, because, evil is so subjective. What's evil to one person is perfectly okay to somebody else. So I just found it to be not very effective. You can kind of squint and make something that is evil look not so evil. And then I thought, well, what about the golden rule, right? So the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But that's kind of a slippery slope, because who says that you're the arbiter of what someone else should have done to them? Just because you're okay with it doesn't mean they'll be okay with it. So that's not really a good rule of thumb either. So then the lawyers will tell you, well, just do disclosure, right? As long as people know what they're going to get, then that's it. We've covered our ass, right? We're fine. So that's kind of the status quo that we have today. And it also is not a good ethical bar, because what that means is essentially exactly. We have these terms of service that go on for pages and pages and pages, and nobody reads them, but we sign them anyway. And there's all kinds of crap in there that if you really knew what was happening, you wouldn't agree to. So that's not a good ethical standard either. So here's what I came up with. It's a very simple test that is practical enough to actually be useful in a day-to-day context. And the idea is, this is called the regret test. That the one way that we can decide whether a tactic is persuasion versus coercion, and there's a big difference there, right? There's two types of manipulation. Persuasion is helping people do things they want to do. Coercion is getting them to do something they don't want to do. The difference between persuasion, which is perfectly ethical, right? Persuasion is helping people, exercise in the gym like Fitbod does, or helping them study a language like Duolingo does. It's not the tactic itself. It's about to what ends, right? What does the user think about that particular tactic? So persuasion, people will pay for. They love. Persuasion is great. Coercion is unethical. Coercion is never something we should do, getting them to do something that they don't want to do. What's the difference? In one word, the difference between persuasion and coercion is one word, and that one word is regret. So this is called the regret test. And the regret test says that if you are a designer and you're in a room and you have influence over the product, not necessarily that you're a designer, sorry. If you're anybody who has influence over the user experience, I should say, you can raise your hand when you see a tactic that you think is potentially sketchy. You can raise your hand and say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure about this. Can we run a regret test? A regret test says that we bring in users, and we've always done this, right? It doesn't matter what product you work on. You do user testing. You bring people into a room and you test the usability of the product. And we ask them, would they do what the designer designed for you to do, knowing everything the designer knows? We test for regret. So if you brought people in a room and say, hey, I cookied you, and then I showed you this ad, and then I did this, and I got this data from you, would they be okay with it? I used this persuasive tactic, and I used this dark pattern to put something into your cart, and you didn't realize it. Would they be okay with it? And so, if we actually brought people into a room and just did this, just asked them, hey, do you regret what just happened to you through this experience, knowing everything that I, as a designer, know? We're talking about 5 people. We could run this test with 5 people. The good news is that in my experience, when this question is raised, it almost never gets to the testing stage. People actually almost never do the test with people because they realize, actually, you know what? I would regret doing this. I don't want this dark pattern used on me. I probably wouldn't do it. And so, or even if they say, yeah, I'd be fine with it, but they know that their user would likely regret it, that's enough to usually put the kibosh on these ideas. So I wanted something really quick that flows off the tongue that you could just raise your hand and say, I'm not sure about that design pattern. Can we do a regret test? And people know what you're talking about. And sometimes go ahead and run it, right? Like that. I think that would be terrific. So I think that if there's one, new word of wisdom, you can read all about how to make a bunch of money and make habit forming products in my book. But something that's not in the book that I think is important to spread is this idea of a new ethical test that we can use in day-to-day life in our businesses.
Fantastic. I think that is, I'm pretty sure I've heard it from you before, but I think it's a fantastic test that is very, very, very useful in these kinds of situations. And changing a bit the subject now, Nir, what would you say is your favorite game?
My favorite game? I'm a big fan of Dr. Mario. I know it's a little old school, but I got really into that on a flight recently. So that's a pretty good one. What's your favorite game?
My favorite game? Oof, that's a difficult question. Right now, I would say that something I'm playing a lot and I'm enjoying a lot is Mario Maker, because I just got the Nintendo Switch. And the ability to design all these things, doing all these things and being into gamification and game strategies and so on is a very powerful tool and very interesting to be able to work around.
I'll check it out.
So also after listening to all these things we've been talking about, is there anybody that comes to your mind that you would perhaps enjoy listening to in an episode like this one in Professor Game?
Oh, that's a good question. I recently started reading Rory Sutherland's book. He's the chairman of Ogilvy, and he wrote this book called Alchemy that I know him, and he is incredibly enjoyable to listen to. I don't know if you had him on the show or heard him speak. He's fascinating, and I just want to share this conclusion that he makes in the book, and he gives a lot of case studies and anecdotes to illustrate it. But kind of to cut to the chase, he basically is giving you this formula, or sorry, not giving you a formula, but making a case for why behavioral design through his profession of advertising is not something that makes people buy a product. That's not the purpose of advertising. The purpose of advertising is to change your perception of the product itself when you have already bought it. And I think that's actually a pretty profound shift. We think about, we see those ads for Coca-Cola or whatever company because they want us to buy it. But actually, and I'm pretty convinced about this, it's really those ads are about a post-purchase rationalization. And it's not tricking you. It's by creating a perception of a product, by creating a pattern of what you should perceive a product's worth to be, it actually does enhance your enjoyment of that product. And I really like the book. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's a great read.
Fantastic, because that was actually the next question about if there's any book that you would recommend. So I'm guessing you would pick that one.
Yeah, 2 for 1 there. That was good.
Aside, of course, from Hooked and Indistractable. What would you say again in within your realm? What would you say is your superpower? That thing that your sweet spot. That thing that you do better than probably most or everybody else in what you do in a regular basis.
Okay, so I'll give you my superpower and my pseudo superpower. My superpower is, I think, that I have the ability to make complex ideas understandable. Making ideas simple but not simplistic. That the simplistic mind, the low fidelity mind, just sees a surface level analysis, right? Right now, the subject of indistractable is that many people think, okay, distraction is caused by technology because they see technology in people's hands and they're distracted, so therefore, cause and effect. That's a very low fidelity way to look at something, right? People are, I think I don't know if this has always existed, but it definitely seems like these days people see the big picture and they don't see the granularity that makes up the big picture. And sometimes when you really look close at something, it's like a pointillism painting. If you go zoom out, you see the big picture, but only by understanding really, getting really close to the painting do you understand how the painting was made and why it looks the way it looks. And I think these days people have a tendency to just see the big picture, right? And they make these snap judgments without understanding the root cause of things. And that's really what Indistractable is about. It's about the root cause of distraction, not just the proximal causes. And so I think, it took me a long time, but I really enjoy the process of trying to make, complex things understandable. And in the process, overturning people's apple carts, overturning their perception of the world. I love when someone changes my mind. It's such a great feeling to say, I was pretty convinced the world was one way, but now that you've unplugged me from the matrix, I see it a completely different way. I love that feeling, and I want to give it to others. So there's a lot of that in my books. The pseudo superpower is this power to become indistractable. And the reason I call it a pseudo superpower is that while it is a superpower, I do think that becoming indistractable is the skill of the century. That there are very quickly the world is bifurcating into two kinds of people. People who allow their attention and their behavior to be manipulated by others. And I'm not talking about just technology companies, although they certainly will play a role in manipulating our behavior. It's people like your boss, your significant other, your kids, what's going on in the news. All of these things manipulate us. And there are people in the world who will allow their lives and their attention to continue to be manipulated. And then there are people who are becoming indistractable. And I think that is going to be an increasingly important skill, because if you want to live the life you want, you can't just do the right things. You also have to prevent doing the wrong things, the things that leads you off track. And so that's why it's so important in this age when technology is becoming more pervasive, more persuasive, that we understand how to be indistractable. And the reason I call it a pseudo superpower is because, unlike real superpowers, everyone can have this power. Right? It's not really a superpower if everyone can have it. There's nothing blocking everyone from being indistractable. We all can get the best of technology without letting it get the best of us.
Wow. That is profound, and that makes a lot of sense. When you talked about the pseudo superpower, I was suspecting it would come this way, but I really, really enjoyed the way you put it through. And again, I haven't still read your book because it's on pre-sale. I will be getting it as soon as it comes out. Depending on when this episode comes out, that will be before or after. I'm sure I will enjoy it a lot. I've been following what you've been talking about because, again, if you read Nir's blog, you'll see how his talks and what he's been writing is also more and more related to this topic. And I do find it super interesting, and I do think I need that superpower right now.
You can have it. Yeah. So, if you don't mind, I'll give a quick plug. If you go to my blog, nirandfar.com, Nir is spelled like my first name, Nir, and far.com, nirandfar.com. I've been writing for several years now, so there's articles about how to design your behavior, how to design your users' behavior, a lot of articles about those topics. If you're particularly interested in Indistractable, which is this the new book that comes out in September 2019.
Let me pause you for a second because Nir also has many of his articles as well available through a podcast. And since you're listening to this, you're probably into podcasts. So
yes, that's right. Yeah.
that can also be found there as well.
if you prefer to have articles read to you, I don't do interviews because I don't have the talent you have, your superpower of asking these great questions. I don't know how to do that. So I just read my articles, or I have a voice actor read some of my articles. That's what my podcast is about. And then Indistractable, that you can find more information on at indistractable.com. It's N-I-N, distract, A-B-L-E, indistractable.com. And there's lots of resources there and tools and all kinds of things that you can download there from indistractable.com that can help you master this skill of the century.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I was going to ask you for all those contact details, but now we have them. And before I let you go, Nir, because I know your life is very well structured and you'll have your next thing coming up very soon, I want to know if you have any final piece of advice for our listeners, for the engagers, especially those who haven't done these kinds of things that you do to a daily basis, like how to get started, where to lead them to. I don't know, any quick advice that you want to leave them with. And then we'll say that for now it's game over.
Yeah, so I think if there's one piece of advice, I think for builders out there, I think building for yourself is a piece of untapped advice. Don't start a company because you want to get rich. You're just bad at math. If the reason you want to start a startup is to get rich, because your odds are very, very small of actually making a ton of money building a startup. But if you build a product that you yourself want, if you build something that you need to exist in the world, then you can't fail. And not only that, that's a great ethical place to be, right? To be the kind of person who's building a product for themselves. I think that this is part of the manipulation matrix I talk about in my book. But you also you're in a great business position, because the hardest part around building a new product or service is understanding what your customer wants. And so when you yourself are the customer, you have a huge competitive advantage, right? Because you know what you need. So, many times we try and have stars in our eyes and say we're going to build a business for somebody else way out there. And that actually is not the best strategy. The best strategy is to build something that you yourself want to exist in the world, because then you can't fail.
Absolutely. Fantastic advice. I have to completely agree. So thank you very much, Nir, for being in this podcast today. Just as I made you the question of who would you like to listen to in this episode, I had quite a few past guests asking for you. So it's been a fantastic opportunity to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I'm very honored. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
I hope you had as much fun as we are having here, myself and the Engagers. But for now, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers. Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this episode 100 with Nir Eyal. Do you have questions that you would like to ask future guests? Then go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it will come up in a future episode and you'll get your answer. Before you go on to your next mission, if you'd like to know what we have in store for next episode, then all you have to do is subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.